welcome back to INMR. In today's podcast, I'm going to be analysing Tottenham's 3-0 win against Manchester United at Old Trafford. It was a statement win for Spurs and an awful Sunday for Man United, and the pressure is piling up on Ten Hag now. But how did it all happen? Well, today I'm going to explain that to you, starting off with the overloads in midfield from Spurs' point of view. So Tottenham's 4-3-3 shape immediately overloaded Man United's 4-4-2 defensive structure, with James Maddison and Dejan Kulusevski very fluid in their movements. Whenever United's front line narrowed to screen access into pivot Rodrigo Bentancur, Maddison would drop out of the central spaces and receive the ball freely, as you can see on screen. From there, he could combine with centre-backs and narrow-in full-backs to easily build around United's block. With time on the ball, Maddison also began connecting with the high and wide players, pinning United's back line. This quality possession continued for Spurs, with fullbacks Pedro Porro and Destiny Udogie narrowing much earlier to provide more central passing options around United's two deeper central midfielders. This eventually dragged Marcus Rashford and Alejandro Garnacho inside, limiting the central access Tottenham had to combine. But it also opened passing lanes from the centre-backs and Bentancur into the wingers Brennan Johnson and Timo Werner. The latter pair's pace and direct dribbling helped Spurs attack around United's unconvincing 4-4-2, with Maddison now positioned higher within the left channel, becoming a key creative threat in the final third. In the first half, Spurs managed 12 shots, although they only managed to score once. In addition to their quality on the ball, Tottenham's high press was very effective in limiting the opposition's build-up. Solanke locked the play one way, forcing United centre-backs to play around. Tottenham's full-back and winger pairings then jumped to duel near the touchline, and when United worked the ball inside, aiming to utilise Diogo Dalot's inverted movements from left-back, Kulusevski and Maddison pressed on United's deepest central options. Bentancur plus one of Spurs' centre-backs then supported the central press, which did leave plenty of space behind. They were fully committed to the high press though, which most of the time was very successful. The home side's build-up play was so poor that they were unable to beat the high press with any consistency, so instead they decided to target the wide areas via direct long balls from the back and from midfield regains to instigate quick and direct counter-attacks. Garnacho and Rashford looked to attack the space in behind Tottenham's very high line, driving at their opponents to get into the final third as efficiently as they could. When United regained possession in the middle third, the inverting Spurs fullback also gave the home side's wingers ideal space to run into. To be honest, this was United's only real outlet for most of the first half. United struggled to play through a Spurs midfield that was particularly compact. As such, the switches of play helped find their wingers to attack the opposing fullbacks in a 1v1. Although this did help progress the ball up the pitch, United did lack numbers in attack. Their deeper passing was so unconvincing that they required extra players to drop deep in order to keep the ball long enough to be able to work an accurate switch of play. But of course this meant fewer numbers high up the pitch to attack Tottenham's back line. And the big alarm bells for United is that the only notable chance that United had in the first half was when Spurs were briefly down to 10 players due to the Udogie injury. It was United though who were permanently reduced to 10 men following Bruno Fernandes' challenge on Maddison, but instead of sitting in the low block after that, United did commit to defending relatively high. Mason Mount was added to the front unit where he pressed alongside Garnacho and Rashford, with just Casemiro and Manuel Ugarte then covering between and into the wide areas. Tottenham's back line expanded to play around and drag United across the pitch. Bentancur dropped into the back line when needed to further stretch United's attempted press and enable Spurs to find their central midfielder to switch the play. It wasn't long before this approach allowed Tottenham to get that crucial second goal. United did find some momentum to attack at 2-0 down despite being player short, but Tottenham regained composure on the ball and control. As they began to switch the play around United again, Maddison, Werner and Jed Spence attacked as a trio on the left, fluidly rotating to exploit United's right-hand side. On the Spurs right, Bentancur moved across, joining Pedro Porro and Brennan Johnson to provide similar support and attacking patterns to those seen on the left. United continued to defend with only two central midfielders, meaning Kulusevski had licence to run through the centre and work closer to Dominic Solanke. Spurs continued to make chances in the second half, eventually adding a third from a corner, but arguably should have had more. Kulusevski, though, was excellent across the whole match. In fact, he created 9 chances in the match, which is the most any player has ever created visiting Old Trafford. It wasn't just down to Kulusevski, though. In the first half especially, his partnership with James Maddison rather than Solanke tore United to shreds. A lot of this was down to the hard pressing, which in the first half alone led to Spurs winning possession 7 times in the final third. But what they did do on the ball was even more impressive, with Kulusevski in his new position alongside Maddison. Kulusevski was incredibly creative, as I said, and with Maddison pulling wider to get on the ball early, it gave Kulusevski the licence to roam wherever he needed to, and often you'd see him getting really intelligent spaces between the lines in order to carve United open. As you can see here, the stats of Kulusevski and Maddison: 9 key passes from Kulusevski, 3 big chances created, 1 goal. He was just excellent. And then James Maddison, just the 1 key pass, but he was maybe going under the radar a little bit because of how well Kulusevski was doing. But the movement that Maddison was making throughout the entire match was allowing Kulusevski to get in those key areas and ultimately get on the ball as often as he did. Spurs finished the game with an XG of 4.67, which is a club record since records began in the Premier League. But as good as Spurs were, it is Man United's off-the-ball football that played into their hands to help them be so dominant. The first major error was using a 4-4-2 with Kobbie Mainoo and Agate in the middle. Ten Hag has instructed his players to break quickly and directly, which inevitably means that Garnacho and Rashford push very high, turning the formation into a 4-2-4. A 4-2-4 shape means a wide open and understocked midfield, and sure enough, this image you can see on screen, highlighting the team's average positions, shows the enormous gap between midfield and defence, plus the huge space around those isolated midfielders. What made it even worse is that Bruno Fernandes and Joshua Zirkzee appeared to press at almost random intervals. Sometimes they wouldn't be bothered at all, they'd let Tottenham play, and in other instances they would go, which was really, really confusing to watch and just comes back to that idea of, does Ten Hag really have a style? The biggest issue of all, though, was that obviously without that collective press, if you had 2 players suddenly rushing up to pressure the other team, it would break the chain and leave massive patches of space open behind them. This happened all over the pitch, and here, ahead of Brennan Johnson hitting the post with the score 1-0, Noussair Mazraoui charges into a missed tackle on Udogie, and then Matthijs de Ligt does the exact same with Timo Werner. Both Mazraoui and de Ligt has poor matches, but we can blame an incoherent pressing structure for that. Notice how there's no visible shape in this picture, big gaps between every player on screen, and those 2 midfielders who are circled having the majority of the pitch to cover all on their own. A stretched shape, which is stretched even further by the pressing, explains how Kulusevski ran the show and why Spurs' aggressive game consistently won out. Erik Ten Hag did admit that the press was no good in the first half, but it would be wrong to simply reflect the performance on a tactical issue. There were points where Man United struggled to even pass the ball to one another. Their passing accuracy was just 77.3% in the first half, defined by wayward touches and confused interactions. Unfortunately, this is the Man United we've come to know, a passive, timid and disorganised team on and off the ball. And the starkest example of all was the opening goal, where they're allowing Mickey van de Ven to run through the entire team to set up a 3rd-minute opener. This could be the start of the end for Erik Ten Hag, who in my opinion was lucky to still be here this season anyway, but with upcoming games it really looks like his United future is in a lot of trouble. Next up, they face Porto in the Europa League away, which is going to be a tough fixture, but in the Premier League they've got Aston Villa next at Villa Park. That's a really tough game. Then they play Brentford at Old Trafford, and I think that could potentially be the nail in the coffin. Brentford have scored in the opening minute of their last 3 Premier League matches, and if they can do that again at Old Trafford, I do think the side will just collapse and Brentford can go on to win. They then face Fenerbahce in another Europa League contest, and on the 27th of October they visit the London Stadium to play West Ham, who themselves have been out of form. So I think what we're going to find is that West Ham versus United game at the end of October is going to be potentially Ten Hag's last game in charge. If they go through those 4 games against Porto, Villa, Brentford and Fenerbahce and struggle, which I do think they will, that West Ham match is going to be pivotal in my opinion. If they can't beat West Ham, who are struggling, who aren't playing a great style themselves, who are adjusting to this new manager, that is in my opinion the end of Ten Hag at United. They have been very lenient. Obviously, they struggled to bring someone in at the end of last season, which is why he stayed. But I don't think you can ignore it. If he struggles in these next 4 games and then doesn't get a result against West Ham, I think Ten Hag's got to go. That is where I'm going to end today's podcast, but there are plenty others you can go and listen to. For extra content, be sure to check out my website. That's inmrfootball.co.uk. On there you can find match reports, live blogs, club updates and so much more. And if that's not enough, INMR is also on X and Instagram, so you can follow me on both of those platforms for even more daily football updates. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.